Welcome to the Explainer. So let's just jump right into it. Today, we're taking a look at the incredibly delicate and honestly kind of fragile balance of property rights. We're going to explore how the invisible rules governing what we own or what we all share can literally shape the face of the earth. And to really grasp this, we're going to start by looking at the aftermath of a truly staggering catastrophe. 75%. I really want you to let that number sink in for a second. That staggering figure is the sheer volume of water lost from what was, and this wasn't even that long ago, the fourth largest inland sea on the entire planet. When you map its transformation from 1960 to 2003, it's honestly heartbreaking. Over just a few short decades, what was once a thriving 64,000 square kilometer body of water was reduced to a toxic, shrinking desert. And the wildest part? This wasn't some natural climate cycle. It was 100% due to human action. Which brings us to part 1, the Aral Sea catastrophe, a completely human-induced disaster. The blueprint for this whole mess actually started way back in 1918. The Soviet Union hatched this grand plan to divert the two massive rivers that fed the Aral Sea. Why? Well, they wanted to irrigate the surrounding desert to grow rice, cereal, and especially cotton, which they basically revered as white gold. By the 1940s, they were building these absolutely massive irrigation canals. But here's the kicker. They rushed the job and didn't even line the canals with concrete. Because of that, a whopping 40% of the water just seeped into the sand or evaporated before it even reached the crops. It was like trying to carry water in a colander. But the cotton money was pouring in, so officials just looked the other way. The results were disastrous. Salinity absolutely skyrocketed. A local fishery that used to easily pull in 160 tons of fish every single day was totally wiped out. And the human toll? Devastating. We're talking 3.5 million livelihoods affected. Toxic dust storms blowing pesticide residues all the way up to the Himalayas, and literal shifts in the local climate. So, how does something like this even happen? Let's get into part 2. The tragedy of the commons, and the economic engine behind it all. Before we go any deeper, let's make sure we're on the same page with the terminology. We are dealing with what economists call a common pool resource. Basically, it's a resource that multiple people can use, but, and this is absolutely crucial, it's subject to rivalry, meaning if I take some, there's literally less left over for you. Without strict exclusive property rights in place, this kind of resource is incredibly vulnerable to a massive first-come, first-serve exploitation frenzy. This entire dynamic was brilliantly captured by the ecologist Garrett Hardin back in 1968. He wrote, "Each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit, in a world that is limited. Ruin is the destination toward which all men rush." Hardin was formally describing this exact tragedy of the commons. He realized that perfectly rational people who are just trying to maximize their own short-term gains end up creating these shared negative externalities. By just doing what's best for themselves in the moment, they actually end up destroying the very shared resource they all rely on. Let's break down the math of this in part 3, the prisoner's dilemma, and the logic of ruin. Think of this like a slightly twisted game show. We've got Agent A and Agent B, and they share a resource. Now, if they both cooperate and manage it sustainably, they each get a nice payout of 20. Total society welfare is 40. Win-win, right? But look at what happens if Agent A cooperates and Agent B decides to get greedy and cheat. Agent B walks away with a massive payout of 30, and poor Agent A gets an absolute 0. Because they're acting independently and can't completely trust each other, the sheer terror of ending up with that 0 pushes them both to cheat. So they both refuse to cooperate, the resource degrades, and they each get a measly payout of 3. So the huge takeaway here is that not cooperate mathematically becomes the dominant strategy. Individual incentives trap these players in a system where cheating on a sustainability agreement is actually the most logical, rational move for them personally. And that inevitably leads straight to the ruin of the commons.
But is it all just doom and gloom? That brings us to part 4. Can we save the commons?
For decades, economists and policymakers have been battling over how to fix this exact problem. Hardin kind of leaned toward coercion, basically strict top-down government control. But, people tend to really push back against that. Then there's privatization, trying to assign property rights to internalize those costs. But how do you privatize a fluid resource like the open ocean or the atmosphere? It's practically impossible. Then you have the polluter pays approach, which uses external taxes and penalties. But honestly, the most fascinating work here comes from Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom. She actually proved that local communities absolutely can self-manage resources successfully without some massive external government forcing them to. They just need clear boundaries, local rules that can adapt, and graduated sanctions for the rule breakers. It's really empowering stuff. Applying this back to the Aral Sea leaves us looking at two very different futures, an optimistic one and a deeply pessimistic one. Trying to save a massive transboundary resource like this requires an unbelievable amount of international trust, complex compensation mechanisms, and governments willing to look past their own short-term election cycle politics. Without an ironclad cooperative agreement that actively punishes cheating, well, that pessimistic outlook quickly becomes a reality. Okay, so we've seen the disaster that happens when nobody owns a resource and anyone can grab it. But what if we completely flip the script? What happens if we have way too many owners? Welcome to part 5, the anti-commons twist. Back in 1998, a scholar named Michael Heller noticed something really bizarre happening in post-Soviet Russia. He was walking around Moscow and saw that the city was absolutely full of empty, boarded-up storefronts. And this was happening while there was a massive demand for retail space. Why were they empty? Because way too many different groups, local bureaucrats, federal agencies, and yet even the mafia, all held tiny, overlapping pieces of ownership or veto power over these spaces. Every single one of them had the right to just say no. Heller coined a new term for this exact kind of gridlock. He called it the anti-commons. It's a property regime where a bunch of different owners hold the right to exclude others from a scarce resource, but nobody actually has the effective privilege to use it. When everybody can block everybody else, the potential benefits of that resource are totally wasted. Nobody can get on the same page, so the resource just sits there, completely paralyzed, suffering from chronic, tragic underuse. So how do we fix this? Part 6, Finding the Perfect Balance. When you put all this together, you get this incredibly elegant, unified model of property duality. On one extreme, you have the commons. That's where the right to use completely overpowers the right to exclude. The result? The Aral Sea catastrophe, complete overuse. But on the exact opposite extreme, you have the anti-commons. This is where the right to exclude overpowers the right to use. The result? Moscow's empty storefronts, catastrophic underuse. It turns out property only really functions at its absolute best when the right to use and the right to exclude are perfectly balanced and aligned. Any swing too far in either direction just leads to a massive loss for society as a whole. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on today. Take a look around your own world. Think about the local park down the street, the global atmosphere we all share, or even complex digital patents blocking the next big tech breakthrough. Are the resources that you rely on every single day trapped in a commons or an anti-commons? And how does that invisible balance of property rights shape the society you're living in right now? It's kind of wild to think about, right? Thanks so much for joining us today for this explainer. We'll see you next time.